The Gate, 1987. A misunderstood spectacular horror gem that a time has forgotten, explained in detail. The horror genre is surprisingly ignorant about children. How many good horror films will you find that are suitable for your young minds? There aren't many, and that is just unfortunate, because many of these youngins love a good scare. This is the reason that many of them get introduced to horror with something that is grossly inappropriate for them. There are only a few good movies among the limited choices that they have. The Gate is one such attempt that tried to cater to a universal audience. The 80s horror classic was low on budget and is not the hair-raising kind of scary, but it does have a distinct touch that separates it from the conventional slasher movies. The plot is not too complicated and something that kids would love. It has the classic elements of an entertainer, early teenagers as the protagonist, a clear villainous force, and humor that is funny. This movie is everything good about the 80s, from rock songs that have satanic instructions when played backwards, to the cool gadgets of that era. The narrative tries to use things that bother children and scare them easily. You have the family dog dying suddenly, parents appearing as demons, and the worst nightmare of being hunted by ghosts when the elders are absent from the house. Overall, it is a forgotten classic that deserves appreciation. Yes, it is not the scariest thing you will see, but if you intend to introduce your child to horror and do not want a very dark theme to disturb him or her, this might be the perfect recommendation. In this video, we will take a quick look at The Gate and bring you everything you need to know.
Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
The detailed plot. Glenn is a 12-year-old who is a charming and courageous young man with an inquisitive mind. He has a terrifying nightmare where his home is seemingly abandoned, and he heads to his treehouse in a thunderstorm. The tree is then struck by lightning and it collapses into the ground. Strangely, when Glenn wakes up, he finds out that the tree in his backyard has actually fallen, and the workers removing it have unearthed a weird geode. Glenn's geeky elder friend, Terry, accompanies him as they investigate and discover the geode and take it home. Glenn has a 15-year-old elder sister named Al, and their parents leave town for a few days. They instruct them to have no parties, but like any 80s horror flick, the instruction of having no parties leads to one organized by Al in the very next scene. While the celebration is in full swing, Glenn and Terry break open the geode to find some strange inscriptions inside on a notepad. They read these aloud and head downstairs just as the partygoers are trying out a levitation game. Somehow, they manage to levitate Glenn, and this is the start of the paranormal things that are about to be unleashed. The same night, Glenn has strange visions of his bedroom walls stretching as if something is underneath. The most horrifying moment is when Terry caught a glimpse of his dead mother and went ahead to hug her. However, it turned out to be the dead family dog Angus that had apparently died of old age. The very next day, Terry brings a metal album to Glenn that has some strange lyrics, which is based on the dark book. Terry comes up with the theory that the strange, seemingly endless hole in the backyard is simply a gateway to the domain of evil elder gods. He believes that the turn of events somehow ended up opening it, and if a sacrifice was deposited inside, it might cause an evil uprising. In the meantime, they are completely unaware that the dead dog has been thrown into a hole by a friend, and that the summoning process is completed already. Terry and Glenn discover a section in the notorious dark book that can close the gateway, and when they find the hole in the backyard closed, they feel that their efforts have succeeded. How wrong they were. That same night, a nightmarish horror is unleashed into the house. The corpse of the dead dog is found in Terry's bed, and a swarm of moths break through Glenn's window. Al is attacked by a demonic arm that tries to pull her under the bed, and Terry and Glenn barely manage to save her. They make an effort to flee the demonic house, but just as they open the door, they find Glenn's parents. To their horror, they are actually disguised demons, and soon the father's slimy, decomposing head falls on the ground. The only hope is the Bible, and they head to the hole with the holy book in hand. There is little respite as the zombified corpse of a construction worker who died in the house while it was being built breaks out of the wall. It puts Terry within the barricade and seals it from behind them. Glenn gets their father's shotgun, but it is of little use as a demonic version of Terry comes back to attack them. Al stabs it in the eye, and as the brother-sister duo hides in the closet, the zombified construction worker grabs Al and takes her away. At this point, Glenn realizes that the sacrifices are complete, and the gate to the other world would now be fully open. He makes a last-ditch attempt to use the rocket that he had given Al for her birthday to stop the hellish old gods from taking over. He is interrupted by the emergence of a massive serpentine demon that pats him on the head disdainfully before returning into the hole. Glenn finds out that he has a functional eye in the palm of his hands and stabs it relentlessly. When the gigantic demon re-emerges, Glenn uses the battery-powered launcher to shoot the rocket at the demon. It explodes, and Terry, Al, and their family dog Angus are restored to life the very next moment. The only worry for the kids now is to explain to the parents how the house got wrecked like that.
It was Terry that started it.
If Terry jumped off a bridge, I suppose you'd jump off too.
Sure.
The cast and crew. The film was a commercial success, and the cast and crew deserved all the credit for putting up a fine show. The budget was on the low side at about $3 million, and the movie managed to rake in $13.5 million at the box office. The success prompted a sequel titled The Gate 2: Trespassers, but it did not have the desired response from the audiences. The character of Glenn was played by Stephen Dorff, who is easily the most successful member of the cast as of today, as he has later starred in popular hits like Blade, Immortals, and Public Enemies. The child actors were pretty impressive, with the roles of Terry and Al, played by Louis Tripp and Krista Denton respectively. Sadly, the same cannot be said about the adult members of the cast. The father of Glenn and Al was particularly stiff, and we are glad he went away in the first few minutes of the movie. Louis Tripp had an interesting career trajectory after The Gate. He quit acting, changed his name twice, and even moved to Australia. It is speculated that he became a Satanist in real life, and that would be one hell of an impact from a role. Overall, the acting performances were decent enough for a kids' horror flick, and full credit goes to the director for working so effectively with a bunch of young children. Speaking of direction, the work of Tibor Takacs leaves nothing to complain about. He makes the best possible use of potent script by Michael Nankin, and the narrative is fluent and entertaining. The special effects expertise. There is something about small monsters in the 80s, and the love affair continues in this movie as well. We have seen horrifying tiny behemoths in flicks like Critters, Puppet Master, Gremlins, and Ghouls. And the little beasts are well created with the simplest of techniques here. This is simply men in rubber suits and clever use of forced perspective. These actors wearing rubber suits were made to look tiny in terms of their position to the camera and the humans. They were staged 15 feet below and a few feet behind the set. The furniture around them was enlarged, giving the size effect. The position of the lights and camera was critical because it cleverly hid the separation between the two levels of the set. However, these little demons are well realized and their vicious characters are rather intriguing. Besides this, the movie features a huge stop-motion monster that rises from the ground in the climactic moments. The creature effects are not some Harryhausen masterpiece, but it's still nicely done. And we love the striking personality of the antagonist. The feeling of superiority it brought with it and the disdainful treatment of the young kid when it finally arrived was all part of something incredibly strong that had come to the party. The arrival, however, was rather short-lived as the rocket made quick work of it. Apart from the monsters, the minimalistic effects have been praised by fans and critics alike. For instance, the optical effect, like the floor falling apart, revealing a tunnel to hell, was perfected with great finesse. We personally loved the scene where the zombie fell to the ground and broke into several tiny demons that scampered everywhere. Another striking effect can be observed in the scene where Glenn receives a third eye on the palm of his hand. The SFX supervisor of the movie, Randall William Cook, used his own hand and eye in the scene to create the desired effect. His other notable works include the Lord of the Rings trilogy, Puppet Master, The Thing, and Ghostbusters, so you can well imagine the kind of expertise that he has brought to the table. A word on the sets. Most people who have watched the movie would be shocked to hear this, but the house and the backyard shown in the film was somewhat fake. We say somewhat because the house was real, but the design was nothing like it was shown in the movie. For instance, the house had no back door, but the script demanded the same. The makers had to set up an exterior exit with new brickwork and stairs, just to fit the bill. The hole in the ground was a crucial shot, and there were quite a few scenes around the region. The crew made use of close-up shots taken in the studio, and this part was entirely artificial. The tree was never really cut because the movie was shot in Canada, where it is illegal to cut trees of that age. The makers had to scout for an old dying tree and made the set to the location of that tree just for that one scene, where he walks towards it. The gate was shot in Toronto, and the backyard scenes, which were plentiful, were not filmed in the actual yard of the house. They chose a new housing development project and used the open lands to get better light for the cinematography. The fact that the region wasn't too crowded meant that there weren't any noisy neighbors to disturb the production process. Around the sets, construction workers and trucks were building houses in the complex, and the crew simply fenced off the region until they completed their shooting. The falling zombie of the workman was a dummy. This was one of the most shocking scenes in the movie, and the zombified construction worker fell to the ground after being hit by a stereo. If you watch the film, you will realize that the fall is quite hard and on a tough surface. Such a fall for an actor in a suit could be very risky. Hence, the makers used a dummy that fell onto a small plywood suspended at the human floor level. This eliminated the risk of an injury to a stuntman who would try to brave the antic. We often do not appreciate creativity, such a small special effects team, but they braved the challenges of a low budget and put together something that movies with fancy CGI cannot accomplish. The unknown story of the original script. In this video, we have repeatedly stressed how the narrative suits children, and The Gate is a great example of a children's horror movie. However, the original draft, written by Michael Nankin, was very different. He penned this down during the time when he was going through a bitter divorce and unemployment. His bitterness spilled into his work, and he used up the anger to put together the nastiest thoughts from his own childhood. He even drew on some of his own experiences, such as the story of the workman who died during the construction of the house. Michael had moved into a new house when he was only 4 years old, and he actually had a friend named Terry who told him about the workman dying when the house was built. The original script was much darker and more violent than the final one. And here are a few instances of how the gate could have turned out. The protagonists, as envisioned by Nankin, were much more mischievous, and you wouldn't really sympathize with what happened to them in the course of the movie. Glenn and Al were supposed to be little sadists who would rip apart the wings of the captured moths. The hole that was created by the feeling of the tree was initially going to be one dug up by the elder brothers of Glenn and Al, which is not included in the final draft. They tried to dig a hole to find China, and Michael Nankin took this out of his own childhood when he did the same with a friend. The movie is a tamer version of the original script, even when it comes to the demons. The demonic creatures were supposed to take over the entire town, and Michael had planned that these monsters would slaughter the citizens on the roads during this evil takeover. The gaping hole would continue to grow larger in size, and eventually the entire neighborhood would be sucked into this. Dog Angus wouldn't be coming back to life as it does in the end. Even the demon lord that appears in the climax would look very different. Nankin intended for a more human-like appearance would be made up of blood and entrails. All worked out for the best. We had a very entertaining movie on offer. However, we cannot help but imagine the dark and horrifying narrative that could have been, instead of this family-friendly drama. We missed out on some H.R Giger brilliance. A 3D remake was thought of, and it was supposed to be directed by Alex Winter. It went into production and was slated for a 2011 release before it got cancelled. The movie would stay with the original storyline and would be another PG-13 fantasy drama with the emotional roller coaster you often see in child flicks. It would be written by Carrick MacDonald, but the idea would be borrowed from Nankin's original script.
Somebody knock her out again. I'm calling the police.
Only the visual effects would be updated, and slight changes in the script would be just to suit the modern times. New creatures would be handled by the maestro creature design specialist H.R Giger. We never got to see what he had in mind for the new monster. We bet they would have been an absolute showstopper. Final take on the movie. The Gate is a fascinating movie that you can watch with your kids, and there aren't many like it. This rare breed of cinema has the adequate fear factor to thrill the children, yet not frightening them to the point of nightmare. We love the fluid narrative that is intense and packed with suspense. Another striking feature has to be the special effects. It is not uncommon for a horror flick in the 80s with a low budget to have cheesy visuals. Here though, the budget might be low, but the effects are innovative with a lot of hard work. You wouldn't get the campy feeling at any moment, and some of these scenes are pretty creepy, even for the adult audience. Some interesting characteristics thrown into the mix of things are icing on the cake. And the young protagonists of Terry and Glenn are kids that every child will relate to. Glenn needs to grow in self-esteem, and Terry simply needs to become more mature. The Gate has a decent dose of humor, and even in the scariest bits, the makers introduced some funny stuff to lighten the mood. However, the director did not shy away from building up the tension throughout. The detailing in the narrative and the way they cover up every little story arc is praiseworthy indeed. The sappy, feel-good ending might be frowned upon by some, but you have to remember that the makers did not want to disturb the kids with something too morbid. Yes, The Gate might seem a bit outdated by today's standards, but if you look beyond the gimmick and glamour, this will prove to be a rewarding watch. As we have mentioned time and again in this video, there are few better movies to give your children their first taste of horror.
And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.